as many of you know, last week we looked at Proverbs chapter 2 and we discussed the connection between wisdom and integrity. Now, as Solomon expressed in his writings, wisdom comes from fearing the Lord and devoting ourselves to him. When we grow in knowing God, we grow in wisdom and become people of integrity, people whose inner lives and outer lives are in agreement. Now, I don't know about you, but I often feel that knowing God is an impossible task. And to be honest, it probably is impossible. As a recovering perfectionist, I can tell you that personally I'm not very good at attempting tasks that I know are difficult or even impossible to achieve. For some people they might think, why bother? But for me it's more along the lines of wondering, where do I even start? How can I attempt to know God if I know that I will never really get close to truly knowing him? It all gets a little bit confusing and sometimes overwhelming. So this rather elusive goal of knowing God becomes a little bit easier when we look to the Bible. It's such a rich resource for learning about God and the things that he's done in this world. But even sometimes with all this information, the gap between what we understand and what and who God really is can still seem so large. Where do we turn to help fill in the gaps of our knowledge? Well, I found that a wonderful and really helpful passage in this regard comes at the beginning of the Gospel of John. So for those of you who have been in church for a while, this passage will likely be quite familiar. But for some of you, it might be quite new and it might feel also a bit confusing and overwhelming. So as I read through this passage this morning, I pray that God will help what is new feel familiar and understandable, and what is old feel fresh and vibrant once again. So let's read together John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness, to bear witness about that light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me.' For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." Now, while this entire passage is obviously important, today I really want to focus in on the first and last paragraphs for our purposes today. So in this first section of the passage, we find a powerful statement about the Word and God and their relationship to each other. Much of the language of this passage echoes the words of Moses that we read in the opening chapter of the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. In the beginning is a phrase loaded with meaning, and it locates us with the dark and formless void that was there before the earth existed. It takes us back beyond our time and our history to a place and time where only God exists. So in this time there was the Word, and the Word was both with God, but the Word was also was God. So who is this Word? I think it's really important not to rush over this phrase, even if we already know who the author is talking about. What we translate as word is logos in the original Greek, and here it indicates both thought and speech. that is both the idea behind the Word and the Word that was spoken and made manifest. This Word is the revealer and interpreter of the hidden being of God, the visible image of the invisible. This Word is Jesus. So when we get stuck not knowing how to know God, the author tells us here that the place we begin to know God is the person of Jesus. The author goes on to tell us that this Word, this Jesus, was present with God when he created the earth, and through Jesus all things were made. He was both present and participating in the creation. Through this we can begin to understand that Jesus has a vested interest in God's creation because he was and is part of that creation. In Jesus also is life, what the author calls the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not overcome it. Some translations read that it cannot overcome it, and others still talk about the darkness being unable to comprehend or understand the light. So what the author is trying to get across to us is the unshakable, uncorruptible nature of Jesus and the light and life that he brings. Despite all of the arsenal that darkness has, it has never and will never be able to eclipse the light. So when we find ourselves in dark places, this is a fact that we can rely on, especially those times when we feel overwhelmed by darkness, uncertainty, and chaos. Jesus, the life and light of humanity, is victorious over darkness. So when we seek wisdom from God, and when we know God through Jesus, we shine the light of wisdom and truth into the dark places. We step into the light and we are empowered by it. As we move through this passage, we read about John the Baptist, who prepared the way for Jesus with the people of Israel. He was not the light or the Word, but he told people to expect the Word and to be ready. But still, when Jesus came, not everyone was ready, and many didn't accept Jesus or his teachings. This is a sad reality that we still experience today. And many of us will experience rejection from others because there are still people who won't receive us and the Jesus that we take with us. This is something that's important to consider and to deal with, but I'm not going to talk too much about it today, except to say that once again, as we grow in wisdom and in knowing God, we will also grow in our ability to be people of integrity in these instances. So in the final section of the passage, we begin to drill down on how it is that we can really get to know God through Jesus. The passage says, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory." Jesus became a human being and made a home with us so that we could see the glory of God. The word dwelt also means to fix one's tabernacle, and this is a deliberate reference on the author's part to the tabernacle of the people of Israel. This was the place in the Old Testament where God came to be present with his people, to be in communion and community with them. And now the author here is saying that Jesus came to fulfill the same purpose, to be that communion of God with his people. Jesus is the person through whom we can begin to know God more fully. Through Jesus we see the glory of God, full of grace and truth. This is grace upon grace, one measure upon another. Grace was bestowed to us once through the law of Moses, and then another measure of grace has been bestowed through Jesus, grace upon grace. Now, one aspect of this grace is that we can begin to know God, to understand his character and who he is. The law was a grace of its own. It showed us who God is and who he desired his people to be as they represent God on earth. But the law was incomplete and it didn't give us a whole picture of God. Jesus came and he is able to more fully represent God. Through him we really truly begin to know God because he is God. Jesus has been with God since the beginning and is with him still today. As we can read in the final verse that I've got here, verse 18, no one has ever seen God, yet the only God remains at the Father's side. He has made him known. I love the way that Henry Halley summarizes this passage in his commentary. It says, Jesus is called God and Creator and the Word. Jesus was God's expression of himself to humankind. The Word makes clear the meaning and destiny of human existence. The Creator came to his creatures in the form of one of them to give them an idea of the kind of being he is. I'll read that again. The Creator came to his creatures in the form of one of them to give them an idea of the kind of being he is. The way to knowing God is through Jesus. He shows us God in a way that we can truly understand. And to finish, I want to read this passage again, but I'm going to read it from the Message translation. As I read this earlier in the week, I found that it brought some of those key ideas to life in a really unique way. And so again, I pray that as we read this together, God will shine a light on the kind of being that he is for each of us. So from John chapter 1, this Message translation, it says, "The Word was first, the Word present to God, God present to the Word. The Word was God, in readiness for God from day one. Everything was created through him. Nothing, not one thing, came into being without him. What came into existence was life, and the life was light to live by. The life light blazed out of the darkness. The darkness couldn't put it out. There once was a man, his name John, sent by God to point out the way to the life light. He came to show everyone where to look and who to believe in. John was not himself the light. He was there to show the way to the light. The life light was the real thing. Every person entering life, he brings into light. He was in the world. The world was there through him, and yet the world didn't even notice. He came to his own people, but they didn't want him. But whoever did want him, who believed he was who he claimed, and would do what he said, he made to be their true selves, their child of God selves. These are the God begotten, not blood begotten, not flesh begotten, not sex begotten. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighbourhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. John pointed him out and called, "This is the one I told you was coming after me, but in fact was ahead of me. He has always been ahead of me, has always had the first word." We all live off his generous bounty, gift after gift after gift. We got the basics from Moses, and then this exuberant giving and receiving, this endless knowing and understanding. All of this came through Jesus, the Messiah. No one has ever seen God, not so much as a glimpse. This one-of-a-kind God expression, who exists at the very heart of the Father, has made him plain as day.